the Bible tell us about the way that we do things? There's an exact scripture in there that talks about do everything as, you know that scripture?
I think it has something to do with some guy named Jesus.
Yeah. Do everything as unto the Lord. In other words, it doesn't matter what you're working on. It doesn't matter what you're doing. We should, as Christians, as people who believe in the Bible and who follow the Lord as Savior and Lord, that we are to do everything with excellence. Because regardless of what we're doing, we ought to be doing it as unto the Lord and as an ambassador or a representative of Him. And so the concept of doing things with excellence, even if it's something that maybe isn't our favorite thing to do, or is something that's just for a grade and it's either pass, fail, so the quality of my work doesn't really matter, or it's not really for a job, so it's okay if I don't do this really the right way or whatever. All of those kinds of tendencies that we all have from our human perspective start to kind of hit up against this wall of what's biblical truth. And biblical truth says that we should do all things with excellence, because we should do all things as unto the Lord. Okay, anybody here seen the classic Tom Cruise movie, A Few Good Men? You all have not seen that?
It.
Okay, you've got to see that. And I couldn't even believe it when I was thinking of this movie that I had to think of it as a classic, because it's now like, 27 years old, so it's
I
probably
think it's the
older
one
than
that
a lot of you.
illustrates attachment disorder in adults too.
Attachment disorder? Is that-
No. I'm thinking of different. Never mind.
Okay.
But I've seen it. The one with Jack
Yeah. this
Jack
is the one
Nicholson
that-
is the
is the army guy.
yeah.
Well, maybe you've seen the scene. In A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson is on the witness stand, and he's being cross-examined by Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise says, "I want the truth." You remember that? And do you remember what Jack Nicholson says? And you can't handle the truth. That's right. And he says it with great passion. It's one of those scenes that even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably seen a clip of Jack Nicholson saying, "You can't handle the truth." So I'm here this morning in hopes that you're not going to be on the witness stand saying, "You can't handle the truth." Because I looked through your resumes. Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to be brutally honest with you in hopes that the feedback that I give to you will do exactly what Professor V was saying, which is help you understand and hopefully impact you in a way that makes the resume that you actually use when you're out there applying for a job or applying for graduate school or however it is you're going to use your resume to represent yourself, that what I say this morning in brutal honesty will help you to do that with greater excellence so that it can help you land the job that you want and launch your career. You know, sometimes we think those first jobs out of college are not that important, but it does kind of start you on a trajectory, you know. That first job is what lets you get your second job, which lets you get your third job. And so each job in your career becomes part of that career path that you create for yourself. So we want to be sure that you are equipped with enough knowledge and enough information and hopefully enough motivation so that when it comes to getting that first job and it comes to what it takes to get that first job, you guys can go out and actually get the job that you want to get and frankly that you're probably qualified for. But if your resume doesn't reflect that, then it doesn't matter that you're qualified for it. It doesn't matter that you may be the best person for the job. Because whether we like it or not, the process for getting a job usually includes you representing yourself by the piece of paper that you put in front of the person that's considering applicants. And I'm going to, again, be brutally honest to say the pieces of paper that got put in front of me from the assignment that you all did would have gone in the trash can like that. You would have all landed in the no stack. Okay? So I'm going to give you some feedback, just some kind of overarching things that I saw, and then I'll give you your actual resume, and you'll see I was brutally honest on them. I looked at them as if I was a hiring manager. And as I mentioned the other day, I did that for years and years and years. So this isn't just someone that's saying it from a textbook. I can tell you how many resumes I put in the no stack for the kinds of reasons that I wrote on your resumes, okay?
And you'll get 2 grades for this resume. You get a grade for the original one you turned in and one. And I didn't expect it to be perfect. So the first one, I'm not going to cream you on this, but that's why we're kind of, it sounds like we're chewing on you this time, but then you'll repair them and turn them in again. Okay, so you get...
With great enthusiasm, I'm sure. All right, so here's some general ones. I don't want to give you your things because I know then you're going to really want to study that, which I'm hopeful you will do. But okay, first of all, the cover letter is the first thing that the person that you're applying for sees. Having gone through those letters, I think I can fairly say that you either don't know, never learned, whatever, the proper structure of a formal professional letter. And there is a proper structure. It's not just wherever you happen to want to put stuff and however many lines you happen to put in, things like that. There is a formal structure to a professional letter, and it's standard. It's the same every single time. You have your letterhead at top, you have your date, you have the person you're sending to, not their position. How many of you put the person's position in the address of the cover letter? A lot of you did that. There's things like that that may sound logical, but it's kind of like how you address an envelope when you're mailing a letter. How many of you have ever mailed a letter? I know it doesn't happen very often anymore, but hopefully you've experienced that at least once in your life. There is a format. There's a proper way to do that. There's certain things that go on the outside of an envelope. It's the same thing of a professional letter. There's a format. There's certain spacing that goes from one spot to the next. There's certain things that you include in each block. When you say dear so-and-so, it's a colon, not a comma. There's things like that that are standard to a professional letter. So learn what those things are. Your resume is probably going to be the first professional letter that you write, but it won't be the last. In your career, you are going to be called upon to write letters, correspondence, routinely throughout your career. And doing that in the proper way is what either gains you credibility with the person that's receiving it, or potentially is going to make the person reading it going, they don't even know how to write a letter. They don't even know the right structure of a letter. And it's going to start to detract from your credibility. Think about in the field that you're talking about, you may be corresponding with other professionals like doctors. You may be corresponding with the court system. You may be corresponding, obviously, with patients. There are all sorts of different people in your career who will receive correspondence from you. You want to do it in a professional way so that you're sure that you have that credibility. Okay? So learn what that professional letter structure is. We talked a little bit about it when I was here last time. Your cover letter and your resume must match. They must be the same style. Different fonts, different headers, different styles, different looks. You got to remember that those two documents are a package. Okay, girls, you can think of it this way, and it would make sense, I think, to most ladies. When you get a wedding invitation, okay, the invitation and the reception card, guess what? They kind of look like they go together. There's not a white page of this one and a beige page of that and silver lettering on this and purple lettering on that. They match. They go together. It's a set. It's the same thing true. I wish I had a guy's analogy, but I'm not a guy, so I don't have a guy's analogy. But it's that idea. This is your promotional material about you. And to have a cover letter that doesn't have anything to do, doesn't look like they go together at all, of the resume and the cover letter, it just disconnects. It no longer makes a cohesive package that's presenting your story. Okay? So don't do that. The design of your cover letter and the design of your resume should be the same kind of look. Okay? I should be able to glance at it 5 feet away from me where I can't even necessarily see the letters, but I can tell, oh yeah, those two go together. Okay? When you're doing an optimal resume, that's an easy thing to do because it lets you, the heading will automatically pre-populate in exactly the same style that you use for your resume. You just have to choose the same style. There's different styles to choose, but as long as you choose the same one for your resume as you do for your cover letter, it's going to automatically do that. The fonts will match, the size of the fonts will match, the header will match, all of those things will match. Okay? But if you're doing it on your own, it doesn't make it any less important. It just might make it a little bit more challenging. You have to make those two things match. It has to be a cohesive package. Okay. On both your resume and your cover letter, watch spacing. Lots of spaces in different places where it's just blank space is confusing for a reader. It probably isn't following the right structure that's required for that type of document. You want to take advantage of the space that you have on your resume, and on your cover letter, you don't want to have just weird blanks in there. Okay? Remember that both your cover letter and your resume are formal documents. This isn't the time to be cutesy, okay? If you don't use weird abbreviations, if it's supposed to be a capital letter, it's a capital letter, okay? If you use abbreviations, which should be very sparingly, abbreviations do not belong in a resume. Things like I'm, I''M, that doesn't go in a professional letter, okay? May sound really formal, but guess what? This is a formal document, okay? So you don't do abbreviations, you don't do acronyms, you don't do things like that, with some rare exceptions. Things like in an address, street, or road, or avenue, those kinds of things you can use an abbreviation if you want to. It's perfectly acceptable not to. It's perfectly nice, and it used to be standard in a professional letter that you would write those out. You wouldn't put ST. You put STATE for state, or street, STREET. But you can do a few of those kinds of abbreviations and it's acceptable, but when you do, you have to do it with proper punctuation. You have to have a period afterwards, okay? The states in an address are always, both letters are always capitalized. That is standard, that's appropriate, that's proper. Standard, 2 capital letters for state abbreviations in addresses, okay? So things like that. How much of that has to do with your qualifications? Nothing. Does that really have much to do with your qualifications? Other than the fact that you'll probably be called upon to write a letter in your profession, do things like that have that much to do with your qualifications for the job? No, it really doesn't. So does that give you a chance to really tell me who you are? Not a whole lot. But I guarantee you, when people are looking at a resume, it's that kind of stuff that they go, nope, that's not excellent, and they put it in another stack. Because when I'm hiring for somebody, I want somebody that's going to represent me with excellence. I want somebody that I know when they send a letter out of my office, it's going to look right. It's going to be spelled right. The grammar's going to be right. It's going to look professional because you're going to be representing me. So when I'm going through resumes and I see stuff like that, frankly, I look at it and I think, this is your best? Because I know when I'm getting your resume, my assumption is I'm getting your best. It's like what you wear on your interview. When you walk in, I know you spent time thinking about what you were going to wear for that interview. That's the best I'm ever going to get, probably, from you. So those things have an impact. And I'm going to look at that and say, okay, if this is the absolute best I'm going to get, probably everything else that this person's going to offer falls below that best, or at best, it's at that level. And it's got grammar errors and spelling errors and weird spacing and all that kind of stuff. It's going to go in the nose deck right away. You've just done yourself a disservice. Do you see how that translates to you not being considered for a job that you may be perfectly qualified for? Why would you do that to yourself? Okay? It's not worth it. Spend the extra time to figure out what this is supposed to look like. Spend the extra 30 seconds it takes to change your font so that it matches between your resume and your letter. Things like that, it doesn't take huge amounts of time, but it's imperative that you do it because it will literally keep you from getting a job. And it's not worth that. It's not worth you putting yourself at that disadvantage. Okay? Don't be redundant. And what I mean is, as I was reading those cover letters, and I'm guessing that probably what you did was you looked at samples and you thought, oh yeah, I like that sentence, yeah, I like that sentence. By the way, a few of your cover letters matched. I warned you about that. When you're looking at samples, don't use the sample because you're liable to have exactly the same wording as somebody else. This is a fairly small group. What do we have? 11, 12 resumes?
9 or 10, I think.
All right. So 20% of them matched. Okay?
No.
So if it happens in this smaller group, believe me, when you get in a stack with 50 resumes that other people are, don't do it. If you're looking at a sample, use it for guidance. Don't use it for exact wording. Okay? The other thing is, as I was reading those things, you had 2 paragraphs, and one of them could have been completely eliminated, and it wouldn't have taken away anything from what you said. Because you said exactly the same thing in both paragraphs. I'm interested, and this is not a good sentence, but I'm interested in this job. And then the next paragraph, this job is of interest to me. Okay, you just told me the same thing twice. Why are you telling me the same thing twice? Now, once in a while, you can do a statement again just for emphasis. But it shouldn't be that this paragraph matches that paragraph in content. It's just worded a little different. Okay? You've got more about yourself to tell me than that. See, that's to me the whole gist of this that's so important. You have a great product to sell. You have so much to offer to these people. But when you put stuff like that where it's like you can't even come up with 2 paragraphs in a cover letter about why you would be the best person for this job, you've totally sold yourself short. You can fill 2 paragraphs. You have great things to offer. But you got to tell me what that is. I'm not going to go digging for it. And I'm not going to believe it if you've just told me the same thing twice. I want this job. I'm interested in this job. I'm available for an interview, sort of thing. Okay? You're sure not going to tell me if I've just read about somebody else the same thing that I'm just reading about you. Same exact words, same exact sentence. Guess what? Now neither of them are true. Now I don't believe them about either of you. Okay? Don't do that to yourself. You've got too much to offer to make those kinds of mistakes. Okay? Don't forget, when you're building your resume and your cover letter, and I totally appreciate that in this situation you were kind of making it up because you probably weren't applying for a particular job. But be sure when you are applying for a job, and in this situation you were supposed to pretend as if you were, okay, so I'm holding that standard of, okay, you're pretending that you are, so we're going to treat this as if you're actually applying for the job that you're talking about. You have to be sure you customize your resume and you customize that cover letter. Okay? So if you're applying for a job, for example, a lot of you were talking about it as if it was a professional position, like it was your first job out of college. You know, you're ready to start your career. And then I go to your objective statement and you say, I'm an excellent student. I'm not looking for a student. I'm looking for a professional who's ready to enter a professional position. The fact that you're a student and in your objective you talk about being a great student, I want a professional that's ready to hold a job. So those kinds of disconnects where you're sending 2 different messages to the person that you're applying to really put you at a disadvantage. Because again, I'm not going to hunt for it. I need you to tell me why you're good for this job, what you bring to this job, what impact you're going to make for my organization. And if I have to start trying to read between the lines, or, okay, they're a student, like they want to keep being a student, or they want to, what do they want, an internship, or are they looking for an actual job? Those kinds of things where I have to start figuring out, when you're going through 100 resumes, you don't take time to do that. It just goes in the no stack and goes on to the next person who makes it perfectly clear. So again, I just hate the idea that you might miss an opportunity for things like that. Okay? When you're looking at the job responsibilities that you had, we talked the other day about the fact that when you're putting in job responsibilities, don't just do a list of job duties. What you really want to do in this whole resume, the whole point of the resume, again, is to do a commercial for yourself. Okay? So when you're talking to an employer, the question in that employer's mind is, frankly, what can you do for me? I've got a job that needs to be done. I have a mission that needs to be accomplished. I have work that needs to be completed. Can you do it? Will you do those things on behalf of our organization? So when you're writing your resume, always be sure that the message that you're communicating through the words that you're putting on there is, what can you do for me? And part of that is, what did you do for others? And again, when you're listing that, if it's just, well, I was a camp counselor, so I watched kids. How much impact does that statement tell me? Does that tell me who could have been at that camp and done something other than watching kids? I mean, in terms of impact. If I had a lousy camp counselor and I had a fantastic camp counselor, could both of those people give me the same exact thing on their resume and still be honest? if they had statements like, I watched kids, I oversaw Bible studies, I assisted parents with registration. Whatever the job duties are. If it's just generic, general job duties, it doesn't tell me whether you were awesome at it or you were horrible at it. Because the two people, if you have two people at opposite ends of the performance spectrum, one really, really bad, one really, really good, they could both list those job duties on their job description and neither of them would be lying. But both of them cannot talk about impact, if they're being honest, and have the same kinds of statements. Because a bad counselor probably can't say, I influenced the students that were part of our camp to excel in their work, or to excel in their studies, or to be all that they could be, or to really figure out their purpose in life, or to go back to their school and make a difference in the lives of others. Could a really, really bad counselor, whose heart wasn't in it, they barely got by, they didn't really do much, could they make a statement like that on their resume? No, because that's when you're starting talking about impact. What did that person accomplish? What impact did they have on the organization that they were working for? But if you were stellar, if you did a really good job, if you did it with excellence, you can start talking about those impact statements in a way that proves to me, wow, you made a difference there. You really helped that organization to accomplish exactly what it set out to do. So when you take this list of job duties in your employment listing, and you start to convert them to, when I did that job, this was the impact I had. When I completed this duty, this was the impact that I had. That's when you start to communicate a commercial. That's when you start to communicate something to me that makes me say, wow, now that's somebody I want to talk to more. Can you see this distinction? Can you see the difference between those two? It's starting to click a little bit? Okay, so if what you do when you do your resume is you go back to an actual job description. Some of you actually have maybe the job posting or a job description from a job that you held. One of them that I read even said something about, I think it was on internships. Interns are responsible for ... Okay, so that told me, you're just writing a job description for me. And anybody that's in that job has that job description. But it doesn't talk to me about impact. It doesn't talk to me about what that meant you were able to achieve for the mission of the organization, for the product that the organization was trying to sell or advance or whatever. Okay? So you really, really want to spend time talking about that. Because again, remember, this is your chance to tell me what you can do for me, what you can do for the organization that I represent. And it's so much more effective when you answer that question instead of just leaving it out there for maybe I can connect the dots sort of thing. So when you're talking in your cover letter, when you're talking in your resume, whether it's your objective statement about looking forward, what you want to be able to achieve, or whether it's looking in the past at positions that you've held, or schooling that you've completed, education that you have, volunteering that you've done, you want to be sure you focus on impact. What made me excel? What made the fact that I was in that job make a difference to the people that I was doing the job for? Okay. Any questions? Okay, so again, I want you to think about this in two ways. First, just think of it as kind of general, first impression, stuff that's going to make it go in a no stack before they even really look at my qualifications. I had pieces of paper that were stapled together where they weren't even matched up. That's just not neat. It's just not organized. Okay? And I totally understand when you're doing an assignment. I totally understand that inevitably there's kind of that, it really doesn't matter. That's not going to be a big deal. But remember, you never know what you do in life that's actually impacting something much more significant than what you're thinking it is. When I got my first job out of college, and I was so fortunate, my advisor in college, I got a human resource degree. My advisor, my junior or senior year, said to me, be ready, you will never get a job in your career when you start out. You're going to have to do something in a different profession because human resource graduates do not get human resource positions. Human resources is one of those areas where you have to have experience in order to get the job. So you're in a catch-22. You can't get a job in HR because you don't have any experience. You can't get any experience because you can't get a job in HR. My first job out of college was in human resources. I got a job in HR. It was a position that was designed for somebody that had no HR experience but only had an HR degree. I could not have created something that was more perfect, more what I was looking for than what that first job was. When I interviewed for the job, after my interview, my potential supervisor, the lady that ended up hiring me, called and talked to the professor. She got my class schedule from college. She figured out which class was my 7:30 a.m. class, and she called that professor. She didn't call the references that I put on my resume. She didn't call other professors for other classes. This wasn't even an HR class at 7:30 in the morning. It had nothing to do with whether or not HR was, whether I had that knowledge, whether I'd been good in that subject. She wanted to know, does this chick show up for 7:30 a.m. classes? And if that, luckily I had. If that professor had said no, that would have been the end. I would not have gotten that job. Now at 7:10 in the morning, after I stayed up till 2 a.m. the night before, and I did not want to get out of bed, and I felt kind of crappy, and it was cold outside, and it was a long walk across campus, did I want to go to that 7:30 a.m. class? I'm not insane. No, I didn't want to go to that 7:30 a.m. class. And did I really think when I was dragging my tush out of bed and making myself go to that 7:30 a.m. class, you know, one of these days, an employer might call this lady and wonder whether or not I showed up. It never occurred to me that that might have an impact on whether or not I get the perfect job, exactly what I want when I get to graduate from here. And lo and behold, that one factor was a make it or break it. Total make it or break it. So what I tell you that so that you can hopefully appreciate, if you haven't already realized this in life, you never really know when this action at this moment in my life is going to have this ripple effect for something so much more significant than this particular action. Whether or not your papers are organized together and stapled nicely when you turn them in for a professor view class, you probably think to yourself, doesn't really matter. But you never really know when that thing is going to be what matters. Okay? So that's why we're called to approach everything with excellence. Because you never know who you're actually impacting, who you're making an impression on, what long-term effect this little tiny thing in my life might have. Okay? All right. Any questions? All right, you want to pass these out, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Just, I can do half. I just don't know who everybody is. Those are all the originals. So.
Okay, so you got originals here for me? Good. Because I haven't recorded anything.
Okay, Emily? Yeah. Who said yes? You?
Amber.
Shelby? Courtney?
Over here.
Madison?
Here.
Okay, so look them over. Did I miss yours? Did you turn one in? And what I'll do is do you have more for today that you want to talk about?
No, go ahead. No, I want you to use this time. This is critical. To me, one of the things that she's really pointing out to me is my own failure at maybe holding people as accountable as I should. Because even teachers get into that mode where it doesn't really matter, it's just an assignment. And it's part of, you guys know, you'll get me started on educational system, schooling system. It's part of it. We've been conditioned to think that. And so I'm constantly in recovery from that because we've all been conditioned. We've all gone through this. One of the reasons I filmed you guys while she was talking, because I want you to go and look at the film, and I want you to look at yourselves and decide whether that looks like you're really interested in what this person's saying. You may be in your head doing all these calculations and keeping data, not one person taking a note. And I'm not being judgmental, I'm just saying I want you to be judgmental about yourselves. When you see the video, I want you to go back and look at the video, and I want you to take some notes of the video and turn those those notes in so that you do have a chance of absorbing some of what she said. Because this really is directly related to where you're going to go in life. I mean, this isn't just some theoretical thing in senior psychology. This is real. There's people like her that are going to look at your resumes, and you may not be as lucky as I was. I got to go home to my hometown, to the mental health center. I don't know if that's lucky or not, because they knew me from other reasons, but I knew it was who I knew that got me the job. They already knew me. So that was kind of a cool thing, because they did hire me in spite of all that.
Well, you know, a lot of time, and it's so true, that when you try to get a job, networking and who you know is so important.
It is.
But it's very rare that you're going to know everybody that's involved in the decision. You may know one person or maybe even two people that are involved in the decision. But those people that know you, that are going into their boss saying, I know this chick, she is so good. This is the lady that we need to hire for this position, she'd be so good. And they take your resume and they pass it to the person that doesn't know you. That's why things like your resume matter, because you may know the person, you may think, they know what I did. They know my background, they know my degree, they know that I worked here in summertime during high school, or whatever it might be. But they've got to take that resume and go do your commercial to somebody else that doesn't know you. Okay, having looked at it, anybody have questions that you want to ask in front of everybody? And I say that just because I'm more than happy to go one-on-one and do any kind of questions that you have one-on-one as well. Any kind of overarching or broad questions that you're wondering about?
To get it all on one page, would we have to change the font?
Well, there's a few different things that you can do. The idea of getting your resume on one page, particularly if you don't have a whole lot of work experience, is a pretty good idea. 10 or 15 years from now, when you've got some more professional experience, then it's not at all uncommon to see a two-page resume. But for someone that's just now graduating from college, usually a one-page resume is what's most appropriate and can be sufficient. So before you change the font size, I would look at maybe other possibilities, like perhaps you have Oklahoma Wesleyan University and then another line that says graduation, anticipated graduation 2014. Could you put both of those on one line? Could you somehow consolidate some different lines? Maybe you have your past employer and their address on two different lines, and you could shift that up and make that a single line instead of two. So sometimes you can make up just those where you need a line here and a line there without having to make the font smaller. Because the smaller you make the font, you got to be careful about getting a font that's too small, okay? So be careful about that. Sometimes you can take, like let's say that you have a section that's bulleted items, like maybe you're highlighting some skills that you have, and you have, 8 bullets. Well, maybe each one is fairly short, so you could make that a section that has 2 columns. So you have 4 bullets and 4 bullets. Boom, you just added 3 or 4 lines to what you have available on your page. Okay. You always want to be sure that you print out your resume yourself, because sometimes, and I don't know why this is, but sometimes, it says it's 1 page on the screen and then you print it out and it's 2 pages. So you want to be sure that you print it out and you actually look at what it looks like on a piece of paper, and that you see that it truly prints on the same page.
I get that when I send in my stuff for my PhD, because he'll send it back and say, don't widow like the headings. You don't want a heading on the bottom of the page and then the content on the next page. Well, it wasn't when I sent it in, but apparently when whatever their process is. So there's ways of making that happen. There's ways that you can put a page break in there that will refuse to let them do anything else with it. And you can lock it too. That's the other thing we were talking about when we first looked at them. Actually, Julia looked at them more than I did. You can set your spell check, or it's not really the spell check, but you can go into your settings on your Word, and this may not apply to Optimal Resume, but if you do a Word document, you can go in and it'll pick up grammatical errors that are not necessarily spelling errors, where you have passive voice. That may not be a big deal to you, and sometimes it's not a big deal, but at least you want to know if you're using it, so that if it's in there every other word and find out this person's an English instructor, they're going to pick up on that, especially if you send it electronically. They're going to have that on their Word doc. They're going to have all their settings set. So if you don't have a complete sentence, it's gonna pop right up there. It's going to have a little red line under it, and you get to decide whether you're going to fix that or not. But you want to decide. You don't want somebody else deciding whether that was a good idea or not.
The other thing is that when you do a Word document, some employers will require that you submit a Word document, but most don't anymore. And so I always encourage you to convert your Word document once you're done to a PDF. Because a PDF is then not going to have things like spelling that's underlined. If you send me a Word document and I open it in my Word, even if you said to ignore certain grammatical errors or spelling things, it's going to put those lines under there when I look at it in my Word program. It's automatically going to do that. You don't want that. Okay, that's distracting. So if you save your Word document to a PDF, then you can be more sure that spelling stuff like that isn't going to show up, that weird page breaks aren't going to happen. Because once you have it in a PDF, there's no more of this moving headers and weirding out your page breaks and things like that. So if you can, always save it to a PDF and submit it as a PDF, not a Microsoft Word document.
And not a scanned PDF.
Yes, not a scanned PDF.
Something that's actually
And that's an easy thing to do.
professional.
Anybody not know how to do that? To save to a PDF when you're in Word? You
I'd have
just
to
save
figure it
as
out.
and change the file type to PDF. It's as simple as that. Also watch the name that you give the file, because when you submit it, it's going to say that name. So be sure that you've got a good name on your file. And to me, the best is like your first initial, last name, resume, something simple like that. But don't have it be some weird, resume draft 5. I've seen that. Those kinds of things happen routinely. So it's things like that if you just don't make those errors, you're already standing out in front of others. Because that's the kind of stuff that people do that's just like, ugh. Okay. Other questions?
Did you get yours set in, Amber? You were going to send